rather surprised of the current value of the lot.
We have lots of lots like that around town.
And, you know, I have to ask the question of, if we went and looked at lots in the neighborhood of similar size, and just looked at the land value of that property, even if there was a house on it, what would we find? Similar to
land
that,
value,
we would.
because this lot, 5,000 square feet, has 50 foot of frontage.
buildable.
It's basically a
It's a
grandfathered
buildable
lot.
lot by,
It's a grandfathered
in
lot
that
under the
grandfather.
Right.
terms and conditions as far as the rest of the neighborhood.
So,
But
from
obviously-
your perspective,
but-
this is a reasonable number.
What? No. Hardly. This obviously doesn't take into consideration that you've got an easement on the property or an encroachment on the property, which significantly minimizes the value and value to the general populace, and really only has any value to one adjacent parcel, which is septic system and garage is already in
Right.
there. So it really isn't buildable. Because those two major factors primarily, among other factors.
Mr. You,
Yes, so it's an inaccurate assessment of the property?
Correct.
And-
Nobody's being harmed because the town owns it, so we don't pay ourselves.
Okay,
It's
I
not
mean,
as
I can
though-
get
it's not
that,
as though
yeah.
a private property owner has been assessed for this for years and paid the tax.
So we just
money.
deal with it when a situation like this comes forward, rather than have to spend the time and the energy to,
This is a very good case in point as to why we have so many small parcels owned by the town and operating still in the books, because our previous policy required that the assessed valuation be the
Right.
minimum bid. This would never get sold and be put back on the tax rolls.
yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
That
which
makes
is
sense.
why we revised it recently.
so, what, we could go out to bid, but I would guess that we would wanna set some minimum bid. And is that what you think our goal should be this evening, to set that minimum bid? With the appropriate restrictions?
With the
Yeah.
appropriate restrictions.
With the restrictions.
For, we know what isn't going to happen on this particular parcel specifically,
Mhm.
which means there isn't gonna be a single-family home or dwelling built on this particular parcel, unless or until it's combined with another parcel.
And my understanding is, and based on a previous meeting, is there's a homeowner with the septic system protruding into the property, and he's really the only interested party at this point that we're aware of.
Is that the issue, the septic system encroaches on
I believe that's
Well,
what it
the
was.
property, the septic system is on the abutting property, is on this parcel.
Oh, wasn't there a...
And then there's an easement for a portion of a structure that was given to a previous owner of the property from a previous owner of this property. So they've got an easement for encroachment of the garage already on here, which is granted by right of the previous owners. And then you have the septic system, which was permitted by the town and built on this particular parcel a few years back. So the septic system for the house and the adjacent parcel is on this
Mhm.
parcel here.
I guess that's why section 4 is a little
Right,
puzzling to me as to, that language, I don't know if I agree with inserting that as a restriction because of the issues that currently
I
exist.
think we go 1, 3, and 5.
Okay, because I have a big question about number 4, too.
Right. I think number 4 was suggested by the attorney, kind of in a vacuum. It was, okay, what can we do in order to satisfy the town and meet the needs of the abutter in order to facilitate the sale? And that was a pretty good stab at it.
All right, so
We've had a lot
let's
more
go,
experience.
then I have a question of, I don't know how to interpret 3. It says, no building or structure of any kind shall be erected or maintained on the premises unless the premises is combined with adjoining and said adjoining land.
In other words, what we're doing,
So in other words, if it was a standalone garage, it couldn't be built, but if it was a standalone garage that had some kind of a
no, what this is doing is this is requiring, first of all, it's limiting the amount of people that can bid on it. It's basically requiring a direct abutter to bid on the property, and should they become successful in their bidding process and the town agree to sell to make two into one.
Right.
Right, and he's the only one that can do
It
that.
doesn't
Well,
say
no,
a separate
probably
lot.
another two,
Well, that's
probably
true,
another
that's
two
true, yes,
also.
yes.
But probably two other abutters who potentially could have an interest in buying it, but
Right.
if they didn't do anything with it, they would have to combine it. Otherwise, they couldn't put any structure on it. So they can't put any structure on it until they go to the registry of deeds. and
So it gets
combine the two lots.
combined and end up with a larger lot.
Yeah, a
period.
larger lot, one, again, still just one buildable lot, and then they could, alter their home and
So they could put a garage on.
they could put a
this and
garage
that.
or a
Okay.
shed, or they could tear the house down and build another one there, or expand the
middle.
home.
Would the, if one of the abutters did bid for the property and win the bid, the situation with his property, his septic system, and
The board would have to, the board does not necessarily have to accept the highest bid. The board would accept the highest bid based upon the greatest public need, public interest.
The best
public
use.
health, or whatever. Best use.
right,
So we would not necessarily,
so he,
Absolutely.
okay, so we can manage that, okay.
All right, so it seems like we need to decide on some minimum bid.
Minimum bid.
I would say $5,000, and then, once someone is successful in getting it, the assessors will then assess the land value appropriately, and will collect the revenue going forward.
My reaction is very different. I'm kind of surprised it's that low, but maybe I'm missing something here. I'm thinking that it should be about 25% of the property value. In other words, establishing some kind of a percentage floor rather than a dollar floor.
But if we agree that the assessed valuation as it currently stands on the records are flawed, you're starting from a false premise.
No, but then you basically answered my question earlier, that the assessment isn't flawed.
It is flawed. I'm sorry if you misunderstood. This property is not worth $173,000.
Yeah, I understand, on the basis of this protrusion into the lot.
Again, is it worth $173,000 even if it wasn't?
No, the question is it worth $25,000 or more to somebody?
My goal is to get it back on the tax rolls.
No, I understand.
And my goal is to assist this property owner in correcting a situation that was not necessarily through his own doing. Obviously, a permit was issued by the town of North Reading to put in that septic system without knowing who's,
No,
You know,
I understand.
so there's a whole host of issues that need to be corrected here. And as far as what the assessed valuation will be going forward, I'm far more confident that once this is purchased by the abutter, there will be a correct assessed value put on the entire square footage of the two parcels under one ownership. So, and I believe that if you go $25,000, I don't know what his ability to pay is, but that's an awful lot of money to have to come up with in short order to facilitate his needs in the sale of the
Well, look,
property.
Say
I
25%,
could
didn't
also, I could also look at it from another point of view, okay? I'm not set on any number at the moment, but with that lot, the value of that property is increased now. The exposure, the easement and everything, it's gonna go on the tax rolls at a larger number. So the individual could, after he goes through all of this, I'm not suggesting he's gonna do that, could go and sell that property and make a gain based on,
But he already has a P&S that's contingent upon correcting the situation he has right now. In other words, the potential, the buyer right now that has it under agreement, has it on an extension right now, in hopes that this is gonna be cleared up at a set price. I don't, my guess is when the person was originally looking at the property, they were under the impression or misimpression that the septic system for the property that was on their land, it's not, which established the value of the property that's being offered.
who's
So-
responsible for doing this, the seller at this point?
Yes.
So before he sells the property, he would have to go through that process.
He's gonna have to go through it anyway, one way or the other. How do you sell it? I'm not-
Understood.
Right.
So then, at that point, the property is revalued.
Anyway, based upon the sale price, anyway, the assessors will look at that. And what the assessors will also look at is that now what's going to be included in the sale will be this additional 5,000 square feet.
Right, but the sale price may not reflect that initially. I don't know what's on the purchase and sale agreement at this point.
More than likely, he's locked into his sales price, regardless of what happens and how he corrects, if he can, this problem. So the sale price is the sale price, I would imagine.
And if
They
the
were
next,
probably far along in this process when this was discovered by the buyer's lender, probably. So they were pretty close to closing when this developed. So I think he's probably pretty locked into that sales price. So I don't think that the current owner is going to gain anything. He's
no,
probably going to
the next, if the next
Right.
owner gains anything, then the town certainly will gain going forward as far as the assessed valuation based upon the sale price going forward anyway.
And looking at it from the town side, the parcel of land here, it's been off the tax rolls, I don't know for how long. By going through this process and hopefully selling it to a bidder, get it back on the tax rolls, and also leave the current resident with assisting current resident in sale of that particular property. So I think it's that win-win. I would actually suggest lowering the minimum bid price with the restrictions. I was thinking more than like $2,500. I mean, we're not gonna gain a lot, whether it's 2,500 or 5,000. I think 25,000, I think, is, in my opinion, it's pretty excessive and probably cost prohibitive to the current owner of the property. I don't know, but just thinking at it on a personal basis, that would be a lot of money to come up with to correct the problem this way. If we can, as I said, win-win, put it back on the tax rolls, assist the current owner in the sale of the property, and we will gain with the new owner in terms of the new valuation of the property with this combined lot. I would suggest a minimum bid of $2,500.
And again, the restrictions that we've been placing on it further minimizes the value of this particular parcel. Because you're forcing him to join it with his other parcel. You can't put any other structures in less than until he does, so on and so forth, whether it's this owner or the next owner. So, again, the value then is significantly diminished.
Mr. Yule and then
Oh,
Mr.
okay,
Vino.
In light of what you mentioned before, we don't have to take the highest bid, but we would be in a quandary, I would think, that if we put it, whether it's at 2,500 or 5,000, if someone decides, one of the butters decide they really want that, and they put it up for $10,000,
What?
$12,000,
I
I
didn't hear
don't
you,
think that they would. I'm sorry, obviously.
No, it's fine.
We're obligated to take the highest bid.
No, he's saying no,
Best use?
that's use.
Well,
That,
All right.
we're obligated to make the decision we want, that we think is best. That's what we're obligated to do, I would think, whether it's the highest price or the best use, correct? It's either or.
I mean, if someone's looking to buy this piece of land, to speculate on, to hold up the next owner of this property or the current owner of the property and force them to sign some sort of a lease agreement with them, to get some sort of cash flow out of it because of the septic system on it, I, for one, would not vote to sell the parcel on that particular individual. That's not the idea.
But we wouldn't know that was the reason, though, right?
I couldn't think of any other
Come
reason.
on.
I couldn't think of any other reason, because you're not gonna allow them to build on it.
I don't
And
disagree.
the other thing is.
I'm just surprised, because I believe there's gotta be some state bidding laws that we have to.
And then the other thing is that
Live with.
I for one don't wanna see this go out as a buildable lot anyway, because I think the density in the neighborhood is enough. I think the impact on the neighborhood would significantly be adversely impacted if we were to sell it as a buildable lot. And,
Mr. Vino?
I'm inclined to go along with Steve on the $5,000. I think that would be a fair price for the lot. I understand what you say, Mr. Chair, and about raising it, but I think to get it back on the tax rolls, I would be inclined to go with that $5,000 figure myself.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Mr. Yule, or Mr. O'Leary had made the,
I would suggest we go with 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Oh,
As far as the restrictions.
The owner of the adjacent parcel, they want to have some input, is that, Mr. Chair?
the owner of the adjacent, oh, yes.